Now, geopolitical conflicts around the world are not the only challenge for Pope Leo. He also faces global challenges from big tech. The Vatican has been working on a set of moral principles to guide the development of artificial intelligence and other emerging technology. And that has received pushback from some major players, including Peter Thiel. The Silicon Valley billionaire is not a Catholic, but grew up in an evangelical Christian household and has strong views about the intersection of technology and religion. As a reminder, if you don't know, Thiel founded the payments app PayPal, helped launch a company called Palantir, a tech company that has contracts with the U.S. military and with ICE, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, at the center of America's currently unpopular immigration enforcement. And Thiel has been a key advisor and donor to President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. So you can imagine the attention and concern when Thiel decided to hold a series of lectures on the Antichrist in Rome on the Vatican's doorstep. So I want to bring in, Massimo is here. I also want to bring in Fritz Espenlaub, who is a journalist and co-author of Deutschlandfunk's podcast series here in Germany. It's a multi-part series on Peter Thiel, including one episode examining Thiel's theory of the Antichrist. So welcome, Fritz.
Welcome. Hello. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. I'm going to start by... like Peter Thiel holding these Antichrist lectures in Rome was definitely, surely a choice of two questions. Why did he do this in Rome? And what are his views of the Antichrist? I'm going to go to Fritz first, and Massimo, I might ask you a question and a follow-up.
Yeah, so Peter Thiel's fascination with the Antichrist has to be seen in the context of sort of his whole intellectual persona or his whole intellectual journey. He has always painted himself as a contrarian. He likes to provoke. He likes to raise eyebrows. So that I think is at least a part of the explanation why he did it particularly in Rome. He has held Antichrist lectures before in the Bay Area, I think also in Paris, if I remember correctly. And if you look at what exactly he says, like these are private lectures, these are not open to the public, but he's been on the record what he means by the Antichrist, and there have been reports of people participating in these lectures. So if you look under the hood, it's not, I think, that special. So it's not that he really wants to kind of like establish some sort of like serious theology there. In the end, it's him kind of like ranting against regulation a little bit, because at the end of the day, he's a venture capitalist, he's a tech person. Regulation is something that always is in conflict with technological revolutions, like right now, AI. There's a big discourse on AI regulation. And for Thiel, what he means by Antichrist is basically, he refers to some part of the Bible where I think the terms are the peace and safety of the Antichrist or something like that. So for him, the Antichrist is sort of like a stand-in for a desire of state institutions, mostly international institutions, to regulate technological innovation, which he's against.
Massimo, I've been seeing your facial expression during this explanation, so I'm curious what you're thinking, and what are the church's views in terms of the Antichrist that differ from Peter Thiel's? You know, he came to these conferences were held in Rome, and a number of institutions that had previously believed to have been connected to these talks came out in Italy to deny any connections to these talks. What does the Vatican make of all of this, Massimo?
So yes, the choice of holding that lectures in the Vatican has a particular timing, because there's an American Pope who's writing on AI and who has said a number of things already on the risk to create a post-human, anti-human world. And second, because this war in the Middle East that we're seeing has been called by many the first AI war. And so there's a particular timing. Catholic institutions were the ones who invited him. And so one in Italy, and one which is located in the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., which is the University of the U.S. Catholic Bishops. But you're right, many other institutions in the Vatican and in Rome that are connected to the Catholic Church, anyone who could take distance from Thiel, they did take distance from Thiel. And so there's been a visible effort to not to be involved in this, but at the same time, a certain number of American Catholic clerics or students or institutions that are connected with US Catholicism in Rome, so they have been invited. So they received personal invitations to go. And so there's been a gray area, let's say, between what the Vatican officially says and the reluctant skepticism or worse, and some circles of US Catholicism that are more convincible,
Right.
that are less skeptical.
And I just want to clarify, I believe I misspoke a little earlier. Thiel was in Rome only. He didn't wander into the Vatican, so want to make that super clear. Now, Massimo, I want to ask if you can expound a little bit more about the Vatican's artificial intelligence policy, because that seems to be touching on Peter Thiel's world and where he takes issue. Does the Vatican have an official policy on artificial intelligence? It's striking to me because AI is moving at such a rapid pace in terms of its development and changes. And the Vatican is not necessarily an institution one thinks of for its nimbleness, but I believe that the Vatican has been studying artificial intelligence development for the last few years. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure, they are studying this also because they were contacted by Silicon Valley in 2015. Silicon Valley told the Vatican, we're not going necessarily to follow your advice, but we want to know what you in the Vatican think about this. And so there is a reflection going on there. The Vatican is skeptical about this essentially because, so there's a view of technology that can be destructive of the personal dimension of the human life and of the interpersonal. And so there's no official policy to speak of, but there are already some documents. And I think that the next encyclical, the first one of Pope Leo, which will be published, it seems, shortly after Easter in April, will have a section on AI. And so there is a great distance between what Peter Thiel thinks that technology is the salvific source for our world, so that salvation will come from technology to solve everything, wars, environment, medicine, and the Vatican that has a deeply skeptical view about this godlike view of technology. So there is a real clash of visions about what is the role of technology in our world, in our humanity, and these are impossible to reconcile, I think.
Right. And speaking of Thiel in Rome, do we know where he ended up speaking, whether which venue was willing to actually host them? I don't know if either of you guys know and want to say something about it. Okay, shake from the head from Fritz and Massimo, do you know?
Yes. He spoke, in a Baroque palace in the city center, but Rome is very small, so you can see the Vatican from every window of an important Roman palace if you want to. So physically, there was a distance, but a number of American Catholic priests and seminarians showed up at that conference. So there was a distance, but not in a separate city that could have been like Milan is the city of technology in Italy, but they chose Rome for a reason.
Now, Fritz, Thiel's views seem to be pretty apocalyptic, and he uses strong Christian imagery in his language. I want to see if you can talk a little bit more about that. I know you touched on that a little earlier, but how extreme are his views?
That's a good question. So you have to, again, look at the context of the AI industry, of the tech industry. And the same schism that Massimo was talking about also exists there. There's broadly two camps, or have been two camps since the very beginning of the AI revolution. On the one side are those that really want to regulate it, that are very worried about to the regular person, very sci-fi sounding existential risks of like a rogue super artificial intelligence that's super powerful and threatens humanity. And on the other side are those like Peter Thiel that more emphasize the promises of the technology. And in this context, Thiel sort of like positions himself as a contrarian in contrast to the safety-minded people, to the ones that want to regulate AI, and says, no, well, you are talking about the AI apocalypse, but the real apocalypse would be if humanity stopped technological progress, if some sort of, it's not extremely coherent, because like there's a second scenario where he says, sometimes he talks about the apocalypse as this sort of like idea of a one world super state, like a super powerful European Union and mix of like European Union and the Chinese government that uses AI technology to kind of like remove individual freedoms. And he says this kind of like stagnation, the stasis, is the real danger of AI. And the only way to not have that future is to full on press ahead with private tech development of this technology. So this is the broad context. I'm not sure really if there's any sort of actual what would be considered religious extremism to what Thiel is saying. Yes, he has a background in evangelical Christianity, but my reading, this is just my personal reading, is that he's much more interested in sort of like appearing as an intellectual sort of like innovator and being very very interesting, and not just being a boring billionaire, a boring venture capitalist, but presenting novel, interesting ideas. And I think it's mostly an aesthetic choice to kind of like make a well-known criticism against regulation, put it into the words of the Antichrist. It just produces more headlines.
I want to just, I'm looking at chat to Dolph. This is a comment. This is their takeaway quote: for people like Thiel and Trump, money and power are their gods. Very provocative statement there. But speaking of provocative concepts and thinking, I think we're dancing around something that I want to ask the both of you, and I don't know who's comfortable to weigh in, but does, to a certain extent, if Thiel views technology in this positive light and views any institution that tries to create parameters around it as a negative, is he obliquely suggesting that institutions like the Catholic Church are kind of the Antichrist? I know that sounds pretty extreme. And Fritz, you've just said that he's much more of a tech entrepreneur and innovator. But I think that is something that we are dancing around. So Fritz, I don't know if you have anything to say. Massimo, I see a small smile on your face. So perhaps we go to Massimo and then we can go to Fritz for that second.
So I don't think Peter Thiel has called the Antichrist verbatim. But if we look at these last 15 years, more or less, there has been, coming from the United States, from Catholics and non-Catholics, really an ultra-futurist, postmodernist view of the Vatican, of the papacy, and of Pope Francis, but indirectly of Pope Leo, as people who are a danger to the future as they see it. And so there is so I agree that there is a weak theology there by Peter Thiel and so on, but there is a religious idea of technology, of industry, of the technical dimension. So it is anti-Christian, but it is religious. And so in this, it's very American. So this is something that could come only from America and from Silicon Valley, which is in some sense the new center of to understand the future, not just about technology, but also about religion. And so this fusion between religious expectations from salvation that can come only from technology, yes, indirectly is an indictment of the Vatican, of the church, of church leaders, of academic theology, of the whole world, I think.
Fritz, over to you.
Yeah, I would agree. I think he's definitely aware of this sort of like between the lines reading of kind of saying like, oh, you know, people who want to regulate AI are my idea of the Antichrist. Oh, you're saying the Pope wants to regulate AI. Well, you know, what does that make the Pope? So I don't think he would go out and say that explicitly, but again, it fits the pattern of Peter Thiel enjoying this role of contrarian, enjoying this role of provocateur. I'm sure he's aware of this between the line reading. And also maybe important context, he's not really alone in the tech world as noticing what Pope Leo says about AI regulation and kind of like being against that. Another very famous venture capitalist, Mark Andreessen, just shortly after Pope Leo came into office and made his first statements on AI, he went very publicly on Twitter, on X, and made basically fun of the Pope, ridiculed him, put him sort of like in a line with you know Greta Thunberg and other people that are regular subject of ridicule by some of these tech figures. So they definitely notice the Pope speaking about AI. And again, there is these two camps in the AI world. There's the AI safety crew, the people that want to really regulate AI very, very thoroughly. Those are I imagine the ones that reached out to the Vatican some years earlier, as Massimo has told. And then there's the other ones that position themselves directly against these people that want to regulate AI, and that felt sort of like rising waters after Trump came into office, after the new government was much more pro AI acceleration as opposed to AI regulation, which was the vibe just a couple of years earlier. And I think in this context, they also kind of like felt they have some sort of like cultural momentum to also be able to ridicule the Pope if he wants to regulate AI.
Massimo, really quick question, because you had talked about some people who were invited from the Catholic Church to this conference. Do we know anything about them? Are there those within the Catholic Church who support Thiel's views?
Well, I think so. We know because some Italian journalistic crews were outside that palace, and they interviewed very quickly some of those who were clearly dressed like Catholic priests or friars. And so we know that some of them attended. We also know that there are some important Catholic leaders, Catholic bishops in the US who are sympathetic or not opposed to this new kind of wave of fascination for technology, because they are heavily invested in that technology for their evangelization efforts, missionary efforts, and so on. And so we know that there is a certain sector of US Catholicism that is willing to hold their judgment and let some things happen, certainly on a different line compared to Pope Leo.
Okay. Well, I think we're close to wrapping up, so I want to give each of you a chance for final thoughts. Fritz?
So I did this whole podcast about Peter Thiel, right? And we were among the first, I think, journalists, at least in Germany, maybe even internationally, who really put a spotlight on his Antichrist ideas or these connections that he makes. Still to this day, I'm not quite sure 100% what's behind it. I think there's a certain percentage personal conviction, a certain percentage style, and just enjoying himself being in this role of this intellectual trailblazer. I think there's a certain also way of wanting to be different than previously the tech world has been very atheist. So there's also like this contrarianism towards that. And this all sort of like combines to what we're seeing right now. But I think if you really look under the hood, I would argue that just from a theological perspective, it's not that interesting. It's really just a tech billionaire who wants to make a lot of money and who enjoys being in this role of intellectual person.
Massimo?
Just two quick thoughts. First, the election of an American Pope broke a taboo, and that's very important, and we will figure out what that means. Second, we knew that having a Pope from the United States would always been very complicated. It is enormously more complicated now at the time of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth, and at the time also of Peter Thiel, of AI, who's really in charge of war and might be in charge of health. And for some people should be in charge also of the salvation of our souls. So this is an incredibly complicated time to be a pope from the United States in the Vatican.
And with that final thought, I will thank Fritz Espenlaub. Thank you very much. And thank you, Massimo Faggioli, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all for this live stream on this Sunday, taking a closer look at Pope Leo and his involvement in geopolitics. We'll have other live streams in the future about the latest updates on Iran and more. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Melissa Chen. Have a good day.